Hey Phil, this is Cameron.
Hey, what's up, Cam?
Man, I gotta talk to you about something. Have you been watching the news?
Dude, what is going on? Pocket politics with Phil and Cam. Why? Why are we doing this?
I think it's gonna matter.
The only thing they want to talk about is guns and abortion.
My own views, I want to see the Republicans get away from the social issues.
I'm not saying that Republicans are idiots.
You hear something like that, it's powerful.
As an American, I was disgusted.
You could make the argument that you're probably more in the middle as well.
I think that's just a story that somebody's telling you.
Again, well, with the facts, this is true. Everybody knows it.
What facts? What facts? Who does this hurt more, Republicans or Democrats?
Boy, I've been thinking about that.
Welcome back to Pocket Politics. Cameron, what was your Saturday shaping up?
Yeah, no, it's been good. How about yours?
Pretty good. Busy weekend for me, but luckily it's a holiday weekend, so we get to take advantage of that. Today in the news, updates with the races. So there's still a lot we know, still a lot we don't know. We're going to talk about a couple of states: Alaska, Arizona, Colorado, Georgia, Nevada, Oregon. We are going to talk about the election as a whole. Where do we sit in the House and Senate? Talk about some veterans in honor of Veterans Day, and our favorite segment that we have to hit is Trump. With that being said, you ready to get into it?
I am, but real quick before we do that, I just want to put a shout out for our website, pocketpolitics.co. Go on there. You can link up to our various social media accounts and also send us an email that way. So get on there, folks, and please send us some material.
Absolutely. Link up to our social medias. Let us know what your thoughts are. Give us that feedback, and we'll definitely keep up with it. All right, on to Alaska. What do we got?
Well, so what we do have up there is we've got their Senate race and their lone House race are both uncalled yet at this point. And it's largely uncalled because of Alaska's ranked choice voting that we've talked about in other episodes. But if you look at the Senate race up there, the front runners there is this lady, the Trump-backed candidate Chewbacca, versus Lisa Murkowski. And there are a couple of others in the race, but those are the front runners. And those two are separated by right around 3,000-ish or so votes, I think, with Chewbacca ahead of Murkowski. And on the surface, if you just looked at it, you'd say, well, this looks like it's probably a done deal. But with ranked choice voting, it's not. And so looking at this now, there, I think, is still a pretty good chance that Murkowski pulls this off. The third place candidate in this is a Democrat who's garnered 20,000 or so votes, give or take. And at the end of the day, when they start looking at who this Democrat's second choice for the vote was, and then they go back in and add that back up, etc., that's where this thing gets even more interesting. And I'm just going to speculate that if you were checking off or voting for a Democrat in that election, you're probably more apt to have Senator Murkowski as your second choice, just because she is, known as very much a moderate up there, as opposed to the more polarizing Trump figure in Chewbacca. So looking at that race right there, I think Senator Murkowski has a real chance to hold her seat. What do you think, Phil?
Yeah, I think Murkowski wins. Again, this ranked choice voting, there's a lot we don't know about it and exactly how it works. But I think, the vote count in Alaska, and we've talked about this several times, comes in very slowly because a lot of the state is so remote. But I think with that being said, the Buzz Kelly voters and the Patricia Chesbro, who is the Democrat Senate candidate, I think those votes swing towards Murkowski, and she's already in the lead in certain districts, while not in the lead as the state in the state overall. I think that she pulls ahead. We will see. Her and Shibaka both advance, but we're only at like 70% in that race. We've got a lot of ways to go.
And it's like you just said, Phil. I mean, we're sitting at 70%. You know, here we are 5-6 days after the election, but we're at 70% just because, as you alluded to, it's so darn. Some of those ballots are in such remote villages of Alaska that they're trying to get things flown in, to actually be counted. So, definitely remains to be seen how that one's going to come out. But I think Murkowski's probably got to be feeling pretty good right now as she sits back and looks at this. Their House race, though, is also, as of right now, undecided. And if you look at it on paper, Mary Peltola, who is the incumbent, she looks like she's got a commanding lead over the two other, or the next two candidates who are both Republicans, and that's Nick Begich and Sarah Palin. But again, with this ranked choice voting, it's still anybody's ball game in that House race up there. Now, I think Peltola's favored and still probably has a pretty good shot at it, but Phil, looking at this ranked choice voting, I think you probably got to agree with me. There's still a lot we don't know about that House seat up there.
Well, I think that's why it hasn't been called yet. But if we look at it objectively, I think we talk about this again all the time, the incumbent advantage, I think that she's got it. If you add the two candidates, Nick Begich and Sarah Palin's vote together, they beat Peltola, but that's not exactly how it works. So again, with 72% of the votes counted, I think Peltola takes this one. I think that's a seat for the Democrats. It's going to stay with the incumbent. And I think that's just based on my intuition of the incumbent advantage.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm not really going to push back on you there. I think Peltola probably does hold it. The thing about this is we're probably not going to know the final results, if you will, from Alaska until after Thanksgiving, I think is what they're tracking. So we're probably still 2 weeks out from really having races up there in Alaska called. So aside from the governor's race, I'm pretty sure the governor's race was called already. The incumbent Dunleavy, as we said the other night, he did pretty well in that race. But this House and Senate seat, I think we're just going to have to sit down and be patient on this one because, like I said, I think it's going to take some time up there. But a state where there is a lot happening, though.
Yeah, are we moving to Florida 2.0?
Yeah, I was getting ready to say the state with a lot happening, and plenty happened yesterday, actually, is Arizona, Phil. Why don't you take off on Arizona? What you got?
Well, first thing first, the race has been called for Mark Kelly. So Mark Kelly, the incumbent Democratic senator, retains his seat. He will be part of the next Senate. And over Blake Masters. And then, they got some drops. I think it was like 12,000 plus last night that came through. Puts Katie Hobbs in a little bit bigger of a lead. The Attorney General race made some movement. And the Secretary of State race. Why do we even care about Attorney General and Secretary of State? Well, because local races are the thing to focus on now. So the mustache has lost. Adrian Fontes has won the Secretary of State. This race really only got the attention of the national news and us because... not really because of how good of a candidate Adrian Fontes was, but really how bad of a candidate Mark Fincham was, his opponent in the Secretary of State race. What are your thoughts, Cam?
Well, I mean, looking at that Secretary of State race, I think you just kind of hit the nail on the head. I think people were looking for, or looked at this Fontes gentleman, and they were like, didn't really know a lot about him. I mean, he's not a longtime politician. But I think people were just turned off by Fincham's style. And, he was consistently going, not just around Arizona, but going around the country at various election denial gatherings and whatever. I mean, if there was something about, fraudulent elections or whatever, the mustache was probably there, whether it was in Florida or wherever. I mean, he was all over the place beating the drum on this. And while that probably made, him appealing to some voters out there in Arizona, I think it turned others off. And I think they just looked at Fontes as a candidate who, hey, this is someone who is not crazy, I guess. I mean, you said it the other night, Phil, I think in our midterm wrap up we did, people in this election, it looked like, just weren't really interested in crazy. And I think that's kind of what happened here in that Secretary of State race, was that people just looked at the mustache and they're like, this guy's crazy. So, so the mustache falls. And, but yeah, the Senate, going back to that senator governor race, I mean, yeah, Kelly pulls it off. He holds that Senate seat there. Masters, I mean, he made it interesting, but I mean, at the end of the day, Kelly had a decent enough lead where it was able to be called. The governor race, though, Phil, I mean, you mentioned Hobbs has a little bit more breathing room now on Kerry Lake, but that one is still interesting. That one seems to be going right down to the wire. I mean, where do you think this goes? I mean, I know some of this depends on where the outstanding votes sit. I think there's still some in Maricopa County and Pima County and such, but do you feel comfortable calling either candidate, Phil?
Yeah, I do. But before we get too much into that, let me just go back and talk about Mark Fincham a little bit. I mean, I know you've probably seen it, but Adrian Fontes, as good or as bad as he is of a candidate, and I'm not going to say either way. I mean, I'll side with the guy a little bit, just because he's a Marine Corps vet. He's not crazy. He's not in the Oath Keepers. Which
Mark Fincham is.
Well, that's exactly what I'm saying. But is all that he really had to do was just play the video of Mark Fincham at the Capitol on January 6th. Like, literally, I'm not talking about in the broader range of the protest, but literally, like, walking across the steps of the Capitol in his cowboy hat on a loop. That's all he had to do. So I just want to reemphasize that. I think this is a broader... This election was broader and more successful for Democrats because they didn't have the crazy, right? And so just to reaffirm that. Now, moving on to the governor's race, Katie Hobbs has got it. We're going to drag it out for a couple more days. I think maybe tomorrow we know for a fact, but I'm not even sure about that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this one's pretty close still. I mean, I'm just kind of looking at things right now. That one looks still pretty close. I don't know if we're going to know that yet tomorrow. I have a feeling this one might drag out for a few days yet. I mean, it's still looking pretty close. There's still a lot of focus on Maricopa County and its votes. Personally, I think it's hard to say. I mean, they've still got releases coming from the two most populated counties out there, which is Pima, which for our listeners, Pima County is the home of Tucson, and then and Pinal, and then a large suburban area just south of Metro Phoenix is where they've still got votes coming in.
I will say that the most populous areas in Arizona where they've got the most votes, and keep in mind, most of the votes that they haven't counted yet are absentee, drop box, and mail votes. Right? Of all the votes that are left, that's most of them, right? Which tend to lead Democratic. Of the most populous areas of Arizona, Katie Hobbs has a almost 30 point lead in one of them. I'm not even going to try and pronounce the name. A 40 point lead in Apache. A 5 point lead in Maricopa, a 20 point lead in Pima, and a 30 plus point lead in Santa Cruz. And those are the most populated areas where we still have a lot of the vote remaining. I think she pulls it over the line.
Okay, well,
especially considering the nature of these ballots.
So I mean, based on what you said, right, where some of these are coming from and what you kind of read off there, I mean, it does sound like advantage to Hobbs. I guess the only thing has been it has just been so darn close that I think people are looking at it with that mindset of, man, it's just a tough race to call. And I have a feeling we're not going to know anything for a bit yet. Now, maybe we'll know tomorrow, but I just have a feeling this one may drag out a little bit yet. But
the great part about this is that I'm not CNN or like Fox or anybody, so I can make a prediction and not get punished for it.
You also mentioned, though, Phil, the Attorney General's race out there. Do you have any updates on that?
Yeah, the Attorney General race is interesting. Again, I mean, it's super close. This is probably the closest race in the state. That's Chris Mays and Abraham Hamida, if that's how you say it. Sorry for mispronouncing if I do. But again, this sits kind of in the same situation where while it is closer than the other races, it looks like because of the nature of the ballots that are left, Chris Mays is going to win. I really don't know, though. I mean, this one is within less than a point. So
yeah, I was going to say something similar. Yeah, it's very tight on that one. But again, I guess going back to, like you said, where the ballots are coming from, it probably leans advantage Mays at this point. But again, another really close race out there that we may not know the results of for a few days. And it's just interesting, as you and I have talked about, that we are actually having a discussion about attorney general races and secretary of state races, where, as in other elections, people don't even talk about them. I mean, unless you're talking about your own home states. And so Arizona's has come front and center because of some of the candidates that have been running for this. But nevertheless, I think some of these more controversial candidates look like one has already been defeated, and Hamada may be on his way to a defeat also. So, but yeah, plenty out of Arizona. I think plenty still to come. We still probably have a few more days of waiting and seeing on some of those, especially they're really close races like that attorney general. But another state, though, that does have a very competitive race is Colorado in that 3rd district there. Phil, what can you tell us about that one?
Well, I can tell you that currently Lauren Boebert is in the lead by 0.4, which in Colorado, they have to be, the margin has to be greater than 0.5%. Otherwise, they have to do a recount. So 99% of the votes are in. I did the math. That still leaves, if you just do straight up 1% of how many votes have been cast already, there's still enough for Adam Frisch to overcome that and win it. Do I think that's going to happen? No. I think Lauren Boebert's got this. I think she's going to return to the Congress, at least in spirit. I don't know if she actually goes there to work, but she'll go there to continue on her podcast or whatever it is she does on a day-to-day basis. House 3, your thoughts?
Well, the thoughts are, for me, is this is a race that, many people didn't even think was going to be competitive. I mean, people were talking about this being a +9, +10 point race for Boebert some months ago. She would easily take her seat back. And this absolutely was not the case. You're right. Looks like it's going to go to a runoff. There's still some outstanding votes, etc.
Not runoff.
I'm sorry.
But a recount.
Yeah. Thank you. Not a runoff, but a recount, rather. There are still some outstanding votes out there, but it definitely looks like the race is leaning towards Boebert. But I think the notable thing here is that she just faced stiff competition, and I think it really caught her off guard. And Boebert may now have to sit and kind of rethink about how she acts and some of the things that she says going forward, because apparently people in her district, and this district, by the way, is a pretty red district. Apparently people in her district are listening to what she says, and words do matter. And so, yeah, I think she's going to probably have some soul searching to do. Now, whether she does that or not, that's anybody's guess. But, it looks like she's going to win there, but she is going to squeak out a victory, whereas she should have dominated in that district, being a Republican in where it's at, and kind of looking at how it is there. That western slope in southern Colorado is quite a bit of rural area out there, and it is pretty red. So, again, I think Frisch fought her hard. And so, again, I think some of these voters in Colorado that went in there just, Bill, as you've said before, they just were looking for just more normalcy, maybe a more calm, rational type candidate. And Boebert felt the brunt and felt the heat this time.
I can't say it enough. People are tired of the crazy. On to Georgia. We talked about it, speculated. Now we know for sure there will be a runoff on the 6th of December between the two Senate candidates, Herschel Walker and Raphael Warnock. Again, this one was extremely close enough that in the state of Georgia they have to redo it. But some interesting stuff. I mean, that Libertarian candidate ran on a platform, turns out, of trying to push for ranked choice voting in the state of Georgia. Given the circumstances that we're in, had we had ranked choice voting in the state of Georgia, we probably wouldn't even know the results yet. But that's where we sit. Not too much new news there.
I will say, though, that at least if they had ranked choice voting, we wouldn't be gearing up for yet another runoff. And I said this the other night on our midweek episode. I'm tired of the runoffs in Georgia. I wish they did have ranked choice voting this year. I mean, we'll talk about it as we talk about the paths in the Senate later. But this thing could get really heated because it could determine the outcome of who controls the Senate. And it may not, depending on how Nevada falls, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But, I mean, there's definitely a lot of eyes on Georgia right now. December 6th is their runoff. So, yeah, there's going to be a lot to talk about between now and then. So, definitely.
Is it the one question I'll ask you about Georgia is this the point in his life where Herschel Walker learns to pull out?
No, this is going to a runoff. And I think it's going to be a really close runoff. I think there's going to be a lot of tension there and so on and so forth. So we'll see with that one. But I kind of talked about Nevada here a second ago, Phil. I think that's really the big state right now that people are really, really watching there. In particular, the Senate race. The governor race has been called. But what do you think on Nevada?
Well, I think the governor race is no, it's not a huge loss for the Democrats. It is what it is. I think Cortez Masto retains the Senate seat. I mean, we didn't get as big of a kind of update last night as I thought we were going to get. I was way wrong about that. I think I texted you yesterday and was more hopeful that we were going to get more votes in. Looking at the two counties, so 4 days ago or 3 days ago, the county where Reno is at, Washoe County, was red, and it has since turned blue. Again, a lot of the votes they're counting are not as heavy, drop boxed, early voting, and absentee as they are in Arizona. However, Nevada, they have till Monday to cure their votes. And so a lot of people are out there. A lot of organizations on the ground are going out and knocking doors, reaching out to people to let people cure their votes. Which I'm a little bit mixed about the way I feel about this, but I think overall, because of the way voting laws and voting is set up, it's probably a good thing, or at least a tolerable and okay thing, especially if it gives the Democrat an advantage.
For our listeners, can you just kind of explain what curing the votes means? Because they may not know.
Curing basically means that if there's an issue with your ballot, they can reach back out to you and help you fix your ballot so that it's actually counted. So, for any listeners that don't vote, hopefully we don't have any listeners that don't vote. But for those in certain states, ballots are complicated, right? Cam, what does a northeastern ballot look like? Is it pretty easy to fill out?
I mean, I still vote I'm still a resident of Minnesota, and I will, while I'll say not really sure on the northeastern ones, because that's not where I voted, the Minnesota one, there was actually quite a bit to it this year for my absentee ballot. I had to get it notarized.
Oh, really?
And that was not something I've had to do in the past. So the ballot itself, fairly straightforward. There's quite a few candidates on it, quite a few elections in Minnesota. A lot of them were local elections, but I actually had to get it notarized. Now, that's not something I've had to do in the past. You could, if you were in Minnesota and you had another Minnesota resident by you, you could get that other resident to sign it. But I'm outside the state, didn't have a Minnesota resident handy per se, so I just went and got it notarized. But definitely something to it, or more to it, I should say, than I've had in the past. But I was going to ask you on the curing, do you have any idea how many states allow curing? I mean, I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm just curious if you know, is it like a percent, like quarter of our states, half the states? I'm really not sure.
I don't, but to the broader point, I want to discuss, because this is something that I have noticed, right, is that when I was filling out, and granted I'm a new voter, right, like in my state, so I have not always been registered in the state of Washington, but there are things about the Washington ballot that were very confusing to me. And so I haven't actually logged in to see if my vote was counted. I'm sure it was, because I think it was, but there are those like witness blocks on the envelope, and then there's like a privacy sheet, and the way you have to assemble the whole thing is kind of confusing, and there's not a lot of instructions, even though they send us a very good pamphlet that tells you how to do it. There's still some ambiguity there, and I think, to my greater point is that they're not always they're not always easy. So voting is not as simple a lot of times, especially if you're doing it by mail or in a absentee ballot. I will say this cycle, my ballot was way easier to fill out than the ballot in Texas. The ballot in Texas was tough. Maybe that's because it's a bigger state. I don't know.
So, I mean, Phil, you were touching on the Senate race, though, there in Nevada. They do have curing. 95% have reported, but that's still 5% in a race where I want to say Adam Laxalt is only up by like 850 votes right now. It's certainly less than 1,000. And I will tell you, from what I've been reading, is that his campaign is getting really nervous about this one, based on the outstanding ballots that are out there and where they're coming from. As you mentioned, Clark County, Washoe County, the big counties, right? Clark is where Las Vegas is, and that's the big population center of the state of Nevada. And then this Washoe County that we're talking about is where Reno is, and I think Sparks is up there as well. Outside of those two counties, Nevada becomes very rural, and it becomes very red. But again, these two more populous counties are where a lot of the votes are sitting. And so because that's where a lot of these are left from, the Laxalt campaign is apparently pretty nervous about it. There is one other county I heard about that's a more rural county in the state. It's got a couple thousand votes still outstanding, but I mean, that's a couple thousand votes. Probably a lot of those will break for Laxalt, but if we're talking still major concentrations of ballots in places like Clark County, this one's got to be looking pretty good, I would say, for Cortez Masto. So it's looking like, now I'm not going to make a call, but it's definitely looking like she's sitting in a pretty good position right now, especially looking at what's still uncounted.
Yeah, I'll go ahead. If you don't want to make the call, that's fine. I'll tell you right now, it is going to be 50 or 51 Democrats in the Senate. If you tally up all the remaining votes in the rest of the counties in Nevada, there is no real good path for Adam Laxalt. Which is
probably why I was going to say that's probably why his campaign is so nervous about it. But I was going to go back to that governor race really quick, though. With Joe Lombardo beating the incumbent Sisolak. That's kind of interesting in that he was able to do it. Wasn't a huge margin, but he still won nevertheless, and beat an incumbent at that. So again, it looks like we've got a race shaping up, or a state shaping up, I should say, where we had kind of split ticket voting again. People going in and voting one way for the governor and then another way for the senator. Certainly not all of them, but it definitely looks like that's probably going to be the case when the dust settles out there in Nevada. And we've seen that in some other states too, Pennsylvania and some other ones we mentioned the other night. So it looks like Nevada kind of had that. And to be honest with you, it's kind of refreshing, I guess, because that shows you that people are actually researching the candidates and making decisions not just on what party a person is from, but they're actually looking at and trying to make decisions on what they think is the best person to represent them.
Yeah, I don't think it's a bad thing that people are split ticket voting. To Oregon, though, we've got this kind of race that made news at the very end, the governor race of Oregon. What are your thoughts there? We've got Tina Kotek versus Christine Drazen or Drazan. Not sure exactly how she would want me to pronounce it.
I mean, Kotick wins. It got interesting because of that third-party candidate, Betsy Johnson, was in this race, and she was a longtime Democrat who then decided to run as an independent, as we talked about a few episodes back when we kind of profiled this race. But Johnson got less than 10% of the vote. But, still, came in, 8.5% or whatever it was. So with that being said, she was kind of a factor here. And because she was in the race, people actually really thought that the Republicans may actually flip that governor's seat. It didn't end up happening. Tina Kotek won it. She won it by a good 4 points or so over that Christine Drazen. So, Oregon did not flip like some people were speculating that it may do. So,
yeah, and this is a real weird one because it was really close for a long time. Even had the Republican Christine Drazen up in the lead, like through Election Day into Wednesday into Thursday, and then Kotek, they call it, and she's won by 4 points. So it really shifted based on the vote count and how that worked out.
I'm looking at the map there. She won the county she needed to win for Democrats in Oregon because the way that state is, right? She won Portland. She won the Eugene area she won some of the counties along the coast. You get into Eastern Oregon, it's very red. But again, Eastern Oregon just doesn't have the population that Western Oregon does.
Yeah, and this was another one too where Phil Knight had put a lot of money into it. Like the owner of Nike had basically spent a lot of money trying to upset the establishment there, and it didn't work at the end of the day. The voters kind of made up their mind. But you're right. Yeah, the voting map is very emblematic of the rest of the country, whereas the cities are very blue and everywhere else is very red. By a significant margin.
Yeah, it's funny we're talking about this. I actually saw on TV last night, there's a group in Oregon, in Eastern Oregon specifically, that is trying to push through a bill to make Eastern Oregon a part of Idaho. Now, I'm not saying it's going to get off the ground, but there is some discussion on that. But regardless, anyway, the Oregon race, no surprise there. And again, we talked about this with our governor races earlier. A lot of these governor races the incumbents did well. Places that were blue stayed blue. Places that were red stayed red. One of the few incumbents in a governor race, I think, that went down was in Nevada, actually, where Lombardo, the Republican, took down Sisolak. So aside from that one, though, I think most of the country kind of stayed where we thought they were going to stay in the governor races. And like I said, the incumbents did pretty well. So, Phil, now that we've kind of talked about these races, though, how about we kind of go through our listeners, the House and Senate, and where we sit? With the Senate, I'll just kind of kick that one off. It's probably going to be much, much simpler than the House. The Senate right now, the Democrats, it looks like they've got a path to retain control of the Senate. I say a path. They definitely have a path, but it's looking more and more like they will retain it. And if Nevada does end up going to the Democrats, they will retain control of the Senate. For the Republicans to have control of the Senate, they're going to have to hold on in Nevada and win that. And then they would have to win that runoff out there in Georgia in December. But again, it looks like the Senate is probably going to break for the Democrats going off the way Nevada is looking. So all indications are the Democrats will hold the Senate. Now, the House gets much more interesting, Phil, and I think you've got some kind of data and some numbers for us on this, don't you?
Yeah, so right now, NBC News has projected 220 to 215. There's still a lot of uncalled races. Um, we've got Alaska, we've got Maine. Those are two notable ones. We've got the 22nd district in New York. That is almost certainly going to be a Republican pickup. Again, we already mentioned Colorado, number 3, but we've also got New Mexico. There's another district in Colorado. I think it's the 8th. So we are all over the place. Some big ones that I want to talk about is incumbent Katie Porter in Orange County. That is District 47, I think. I could be wrong. Don't quote me on that. She is in a very tight race. Not a lot of votes counted in California. We're going to get back to that here in a second, but there are a lot of other districts. So I think there's still anywhere from 8 plus in California to go. Another big one, though, is the 3rd district of Washington. So the Democratic candidate Glusenkamp Perez versus the Republican candidate Kent. Glusenkamp Perez currently in the lead, 92% of the votes counted. This has been a district that has been Republican for a long time, and people are talking about this out here. This is a signal. If this House goes to the Democrat, there might be a Democrat majority in the House as a whole. They're using this as kind of a canary in the coal mine. Again, I'm not as savvy of a political analyst to kind of look at it that way. I'm just listening to what I'm hearing. But this is not. I would say that, like I said, the projection 220 to 215 right now, plus or minus 7 on NBC. I don't know that this is that optimistic if you're a Republican. What are your thoughts?
Well, I want to first go back to that Washington 3rd district and remind our listeners that that seat is currently held by Jamie Herrera Butler, who was one of the 10 House Republicans who voted to impeach Donald Trump, and she lost her primary earlier this year. So I think the fact that Herrera Butler got, defeated by a more Trump-like candidate, if you will, probably is playing into that race as well as we, kind of talk about this candidate quality, et cetera, et cetera. But going back to the House, you mentioned NBC's projection rather that was 220. I think CNN had a projection last night of 221 or 222 for the Republicans. Keep in mind for our listeners, 218 is the number needed to control the House. So whether it's 220, 221, 222, I personally think the Republicans are going to hold the House. There is a path, as you kind of laid out, and some other analysts have laid out, where the Democrats could still hold the House. I'll be honest with you, I think that's a long shot for them, though. But regardless, whether the Democrats do end up coming up big and then end up holding the House when this is all said and done, or the Republicans get it, it doesn't look like for either party, whoever gets it, it's going to be a very big margin. I mean, we're talking probably 2 to 5 seats for whoever is in charge of it.
Yeah, and with that being said, too, so right now it's 211 to 203 on called races. So Republicans only need seven of those seats to get the majority, to get to 218, like you said. Democrats needing 15. But who knows? I mean, some of these races in California are ridiculous. This is worth mentioning. Alaska has higher percentage of votes being counted right now than some districts in California.
That just seems
I mean,
crazy.
how is that?
To me.
Yeah, how is that a thing? I mean,
You would think California in these House races, they'd be able to get their ballots counted quickly and we'd know the results of California by and large. And here we are sitting here waiting on the control of the House, largely looking at the state of California. It just doesn't really make sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, the House District 22 in California is at 39%. Like, that's absurd, right?
Yeah,
And
that
then
is.
right out of like right north of Los Angeles, the 27th district is at 50%. I mean, and it's just north of Los Angeles. I'm not talking about like rural, like huge rural. I mean, this is not that far out. I mean, we've got the 45th, right? Again, we've got the 47th, Katie Porter's race. That's at 67%, but that's Orange County. Like, come on. I mean, everybody there, I'm sure, drives a Land Rover and probably votes in person in an air-conditioned room or something. I don't know, but I'm just saying it's like ridiculous to me that we've got areas of California that haven't even counted 50% of their vote. House 41, that's, northern San Diego, eastern Orange County is at, 47%. I mean, this is absurd,
Well,
I don't know.
I mean, it looks like it looks like we're going to have to wait a few more days before we see how the House is going to shake out, because sounds like California's got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, California definitely has a lot of work to do, but we'll see. You think it goes one way or the other?
Well, again, as I said earlier, I think the Republicans will have the House when this is all said and done, but I think they're going to have it somewhere in that range of 220 seats to 222 seats, somewhere in that range. That's my
Okay.
pick. So,
All right. Well, in honor of Veterans Day, did you want to talk about some veterans in the government?
I did, yeah. So this year in this election cycle, we had 196 veterans running for Congress. And it looks like at least 81 are going to win their respective races. Now, some of them are still out there to be counted, but that's pretty interesting that we're seeing this higher number of veterans coming in, and they're still, mind you, throw in the 12 incumbent senators who are veterans and, who weren't even up for re-election this year. It looks like we're going to have at least 94 lawmakers with prior military experience. And that's pretty cool, right? We're seeing.
Well, I'm not entirely sure how I feel about that.
Phil, I'm not going to sit here and pick out candidates, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just saying that in general, I think it's pretty neat. We're seeing a growing number of veterans run. This is the first election cycle since Vietnam where congressional military service has actually significantly gone up. It's been a dwindling thing. I mean, I've looked at the Senate for years, and it just seems like every year when I'm looking at the Senate, it's like less and less people with any kind of military background that are in the Senate. And the House has some, but I think it's refreshing to see a number of military vets getting involved, wanting to make a difference, regardless of what party they're running in. It's a good thing to see them involved, in my opinion.
Yeah, so I will say that public service, if you started your career in public service, i.e. in the military, you would probably want to stay in that kind of thing. And politics is essentially one of those jobs. There's only a handful that are, like firemen, police officers, teachers. There's only a handful of jobs of public service. So I would say that it's kind of, you're staying in the same realm. When I retire from the military, I want to stay in public service, so I get that. Tammy Duckworth, totally cool, right? Service members in the military, I'm digging it. J.R. Majewski, kind of skeptical. Not sure if I want that veteran.
Well, I mean, okay, yeah, J.R. Majewski didn't win his race, but I mean, I think just in general, it's good to see the military involved. Getting more involved, like I said, regardless of party, it's something.
No, I totally, I hear you. I hear you on that. Like I said, I'll give you another example. Mark Kelly, really cool. Don Bolduc, questionable in my opinion. So, but now, yeah, maybe, I do. I think it's always good that we support vets and we talk about them. That's part of the reason we do this podcast in the first place. maybe we give Navy veteran Steve Bannon a little bit less of a clap of the hands than some of the others, but that is part of
but
why we're doing this. So
I mean, maybe on the Bannon thing, Bolduc, maybe he had some questionable things as a candidate. He did, however, have like 38 years of pretty solid service in the Army. So again, I don't want to sit and pick apart what these people did or didn't do in the military, but I thought it was refreshing to see. I thought it was at least worth mentioning tonight. But Bill, I think we've got the stage set for our weekly Trump updates. He is back in the news. Let me change that. He never seems to get out of the news. And he does not sound like he's very happy at the moment. His daughter, Tiffany, is getting married this weekend. And the reports that I'm hearing out of Florida are that the former president is in a pretty foul mood based on how these midterm elections went. And he has been ranting on Truth Social and anybody that will have him on for interviews. So have you been seeing some stuff about the former president and his rants, Phil?
Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't see a Veterans Day post from him. One of the things he seemed to forget or miss. But he generally
although I was going to say,
respectful to veterans anyway. But
I was going to say he basically attacked a veteran either on Veterans Day or the day before, and that being Ron DeSantis. So he had that going for him, I guess.
Yeah, what is calling Ron DeSantis Ron DeSanctimonious actually an attack? I don't even know if I'm sure Trump thinks it's an attack, but again, it just seems like that wasn't the greatest. It was no little Marco. Let me just put it like that. Does this set the stage for our merch line to be just T-shirts and hoodies with Trump's nicknames for other politicians on it?
Well,
do we start selling our merch that just says it's like a hoodie that just says Little Marco and a hoodie that says Lion Ted? Or
let's go back to let's just go back to what he's done in the last few days. Okay, so since the midterms have come up, he's basically blasted Ron DeSantis. In fact, he was blasting DeSantis before the midterms even started. But since the midterms, he's continued.
Okay, real quick. You wanted to rewind to a couple days ago. I say we go back to 2 days before the election when he said if the Democrats or if the Republicans win, it's because because I did that, and if they lose, I take none of the blame.
Right.
Exactly. It started off poorly.
Yeah, it did. And then since then, he's had the attacks on DeSantis. I think it was yesterday. He went after Virginia's governor, a Republican himself, Glenn Youngkin, and he called him or wrote a post, I think, on Truth Social saying Glenn Youngkin, basically making two words out of his last name, Young and Kin, trying to make it look like it was a Chinese name. And that's exactly what he put. Looks kind of Chinese, doesn't it? And then he kind of went on about something about Youngkin being a Chinese sympathizer or something. I don't know, something to that effect. And then he talked about the governor being, kind of a poor candidate until he came in with his MAGA brand and boosted him over the finish line.
Which is kind of true, though.
Well, not really, though. If you actually look at that Virginia governor race, Glenn Youngkin tried his darndest to keep him out of it. He didn't have Trump appear at any rallies. Trump got involved basically online with it to an extent, but I was looking more at the perspective
of DeSantis than Youngkin. He's made that kind of claim too, that he basically made DeSantis who he is, which he's not totally wrong about.
So I was going to say, he was.
Keep
more
in mind,
involved
DeSantis was a nobody congressman. Literally a congressman that nobody knew who he was. He was no Matt Gaetz. He was no, Marjorie Taylor Greene. He was just this guy that nobody really knew until Trump helped push him into the governorship.
Yeah, he was. No, I will say that. He helped DeSantis, I think, a lot more than he did Youngkin in his race. But regardless, he's been attacking both of them, which is interesting. He attacks Ron DeSantis, who basically came out and had a very good night for a Republican on Tuesday, right? He was one of the bright spots for the Republican Party. And of course, he's on there bashing him. I mean, reports are that he feels insecure that DeSantis may indeed be able to challenge him. And then this morning, he is bashing Mitch McConnell on Truth Social, talking about how McConnell is to blame for the Republicans' poor showing on Tuesday night in the midterms. I think he called Mitch McConnell a bad leader and a complete loser. And, he just went on the attacks with him and then said, Mitch McConnell was supporting bad candidates like the loser from Alaska, Lisa Murkowski, or he called her the disaster from Alaska, Lisa Murkowski, instead of supporting the true patriot, Shibaka. I think Shibaka's first name is Kelly, but don't quote me on that. Regardless, he went on a rant on Mitch McConnell, threw some digs in at Lisa Murkowski. Essentially, he's blaming everything on Mitch McConnell from the other night. Doesn't want to accept anything about these candidates that he's helped put across the finish line. Or I say candidates he helped, basically boost up and put across the finish line, if you will, like the ones that have been getting defeated, like Mehmet Oz, Blake Masters, and some of these others. Actually, speaking of this and Mehmet Oz, I actually saw a story the other day where I think it came out that he was blaming Melania for Mehmet Oz. Like, I didn't really want to back him, but Melania wanted me to, so I just threw it out there at the last minute to promote him. He's just going on and on down there in Florida. He's causing all kinds of ripples and waves in the Republican Party.
So this is just another sign, though, that Trump doesn't care about you, Cameron. He doesn't. He doesn't care about me. He doesn't care about Americans. He doesn't care about his family. He doesn't care about the Republican Party. He just cares about himself. Like, this is just a sign. There's a huge level of irony to it's all a witch hunt and no other president has been treated this way, coming out and feeling insecure, right? This is, I don't know. It's just disgusting. The Republicans, if they want to move forward, there is no other route than to get away from this guy.
No, they're going to need to. And so what is interesting, I will say this, in looking at these attacks he's had lately, Governor DeSantis, Governor Youngkin, and Mitch McConnell are not taking the bait. They're basically just ignoring him. I mean, rather than kind of get into some kind of social media shouting match with a guy or releasing counter statements or anything, they're just ignoring him. I think Glenn Youngkin said, "I just don't roll like that." I think that was the extent of what he said, and he left it at that. And I think that actually really gets under his skin.
What's the word? Oh, yeah, of course it does. But if you had to make up a catchy nickname, Trump style, for Mitch McConnell, what are you going with?
I don't know, because he can't seem to make up a name for Mitch McConnell. I think all he calls Mitch McConnell is like a worn out, senile loser. I know we'll talk more about it in coming weeks, but it is interesting to see how the former president is reacting to this week, what was not necessarily the best of showing for the Republican Party. And we'll see how the Republicans move on from here. But with that being said, Phil, we've had, looks like a wrap up coming on another episode here. Do you want to put in one final plug for our social media?
Yeah, I mean, definitely check us out. Pocket Politics with Phil and Cam on Facebook. You can go to P_Phil and Cam on Instagram. All of which you can link to from our website, pocketpolitics.co. With that being said, parting shots. Do I go first today?
Yeah, why don't you go first this time, Phil?
Well, today I just have the madness that is Twitter. So Elon Musk has owned Twitter for a little bit of time now. It does not seem to be working out in his favor. It looks like the payment on the debt that they own is about $1 billion a year. Which in my estimation, takes 44 years to pay off based on the amount that he paid for the company in the first place. but Twitter has never made any kind of profit like that in a year. So it's effectively an upside down business mortgage, right? But now there's been all kinds of stuff. He, started charging $8 for blue check marks to be verified. That was horribly abused. They almost crashed the pharmaceutical company Eli Lilly 2 days ago because of it. So who knows where this is going? I mean, once they kind of had about a day or so of the $8 pay for verification thing, and then he had to back out of it. I've read articles saying this is all part of his, genius plan. I read other articles saying he's obviously lost his mind and doesn't know how to run this company. I looked up their now granted this has nothing to do with Elon Musk, but it's last year's Securities and Exchange Committee filings, like their yearly financial filings. It didn't look good. Like, it didn't look like Twitter was doing all that well in the first place. So what he's doing here, I have no idea, but that's all I have to say. Keep your eyes on that. Maybe this means we're not starting a pocket politics Twitter. Who knows? So we'll see, certainly, as we move forward. What do you got, Cam?
All right, so for my parting shot this week, I just want to talk about something that happened here recently, and that was, and this centers around Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin. So recently, in light of the attacks on Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul Pelosi, Glenn Youngkin was talking about the attack, and he said something to the effect of, it's too bad what happened to her husband, et cetera, but we're going to send her packing right back to California to be with him, or something to that effect. And he caught a lot of heat for making those remarks and recognized that he should not have said what he said. And what I thought was interesting, and actually, I say interesting, actually really refreshing, was Governor Youngkin then, he wanted to apologize, but he didn't just put it on social media. He didn't put it on Facebook or something like that, like, hey, I'm sorry. He actually sat down and wrote a handwritten letter to Speaker Pelosi, put it in the mail, and sent it out to her. And Speaker Pelosi received it, and she said she definitely accepts the man's apologies. And she felt he was very sincere with what he wrote. I will just say this, regardless of party, I like what I saw there. I'm not trying to defend what Governor Youngkin said, but what I am going to say is that I feel that he handled it like an adult, as did Speaker Pelosi. I think we need to see more of these kind of moments personally. And so I will say this, well done to Governor Youngkin and to Speaker Pelosi both. And that is my parting shot for the week, Phil.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with that. I'm not personally a fan of the guy, but whatever, political ideologies aside, I don't feel like one thing being said in a moment of time is beyond being able to apologize, come to reason, and say that. I think, yes, it was the right move. I think that's honorable, and we need more of that in society, not just in politics. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, no, and
you can't hold something against a guy forever for one thing that he said.
No, and I that's why I thought it was worth mentioning this week, and I actually thought it was a pretty nice touch when he actually sat down and hand wrote her a letter. You just don't see a lot of that these days.
Yeah, absolutely. But with that being said, I think that's all we got for this week. Maybe next week we'll know what the future holds for the government.
Fingers crossed.
We'll see if California can start counting some votes. We'll get there. But like I said, with that all considered, that's all I have. Cam?
Until next time.
All right. Bye.